I never should have taken that dare. It started as a casual conversation between friends, an innocent gathering over coffee where urban legends turned into reckless bets. That's how I found myself standing at the gates of St. Gabriel's Church, a crumbling relic at the edge of town, abandoned for nearly a century. The place had a reputation. Locals whispered about shadows that moved without light, echoes of prayers spoken by voices long gone, and an old organ that played itself at midnight. No one had dared to step inside in years, not since the last caretaker vanished without a trace. But I wasn't one to believe in ghost stories, at least not back then. The air was unnaturally cold as I pushed open the rusted iron gate. It groaned in protest, the sound slicing through the eerie silence. Weeds had overtaken the stone pathway leading to the entrance, and the once grand wooden doors were warped with age. A faded cross hung above, barely holding on to the cracked stone archway. Stepping inside, I was met with a suffocating stillness. Dust floated in the moonlight, filtering through shattered stained glass windows, casting fractured colors across the pews. The scent of damp wood and decayed fabric filled my lungs. Something about the air felt heavy. Watching, my footsteps echoed as I moved toward the altar. The feeling of being alone was a lie. I glanced over my shoulder. The entrance was still there. Nothing had moved. And yet, an undeniable chill crept up my spine, like unseen eyes studying my every move. I exhaled sharply, trying to shake the unease. It was just an old, empty church. That's what I told myself. Then from the far end of the nave I heard it, a whisper, low, distant, not in my ears but inside my head. And it spoke my name. I froze. The whisper had been faint, almost a breath against my mind, but I knew what I heard. My name, spoken in a place where no one else should be. I turned sharply, scanning the empty pews, the towering stone pillars, the decayed remnants of what once was a holy place. The silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. Nothing moved. Hello? My own voice sounded foreign in the vast emptiness. It carried bouncing off the walls, but no response came. My pulse hammered against my ribs, and I tried to steady my breath. It had to be my imagination. Maybe the wind slipping through the cracks in the walls, or the old wooden beams settling. Maybe. But then I heard it again. A slow, deliberate creak, like the weight of something unseen shifting on the ancient floorboards. My fingers clenched into fists as I turned toward the altar. It stood in eerie stillness, dust covering its once pristine marble. Behind it, the pulpit loomed, its dark wood worn and splintered, and just beyond it, a heavy curtain hung over a doorway leading into the back chambers of the church. That's where the sound had come from. The whisper, the movement. Something was there. I took a hesitant step forward, my boots kicking up small clouds of dust. The air grew colder, biting against my skin. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but something else, something I couldn't explain, drew me in. Reaching the curtain, I hesitated. The fabric was thick with age, its deep red color now faded to a dull brown. A strange odor clung to it, a mixture of damp rot and something metallic. I swallowed hard and, with trembling hand, pulled it aside. The room beyond was dark. Unnaturally so. My flashlight flickered as I lifted it, the beam cutting through the inky blackness. The chamber was small, lined with wooden confession booths on either side. A single chair sat in the middle, draped with a tattered white cloth, as if someone had abandoned it mid-prayer. And then I saw them. Footprints, not old ones, but fresh. imprinted in the thick dust covering the stone floor. They led from the farthest booth, directly toward me. A sharp breath caught in my throat. My fingers tightened around the flashlight as I stepped back, my mind racing to rationalize what I was seeing. But before I could process it, the temperature in the room plummeted. And then the whisper returned. Closer this time. Right behind me. Leave. The voice was hoarse, a guttural rasp filled with something wrong. My body seized with terror. I spun around, flashlight shaking, but the doorway was empty. Except the curtain I had pulled aside was now swaying, as if someone, or something, had just slipped past it. And then the organ played. A single, deep note, resonating through the empty church. Long, hollow, impossible. The keys were covered in dust. No one had touched them. Yet the sound rang out, sending ice down my spine. That was the moment I ran. Heart pounding, lungs burning, I tore through the nave, past the rows of empty pews. The shadows seemed to stretch and shift around me, twisting as if reaching out. The moment I burst through the entrance, the heavy wooden doors slammed shut behind me with a force that shook the ground. I stumbled, breath ragged, turning back to stare at the church. The windows were dark, lifeless, silent. And then, in the highest arched window above the altar, I saw it. A figure, standing, watching. It was tall and draped in tattered black robes, its face obscured by shadow, but its eyes, those hollow, glowing pits, locked onto mine. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. The church stood empty once more, but I knew the truth. It wasn't abandoned. Something still lived inside. I didn't sleep that night. Even after I had fled St. Gabriel's Church, gasping for air and drenched in cold sweat, the feeling of something unseen watching me never faded. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, those hollow, glowing pits staring at me from the highest window. I had to know the truth. The next morning, I found myself at the town's historical archives, a small, dimly lit building filled with dust-covered records and forgotten documents. The old librarian, a frail man with thick glasses, barely glanced at me as I walked in. "I'm looking for information on St. Gabriel's Church," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. At the mention of the name, he finally looked up. His face paled slightly. That reaction told me everything. "You shouldn't go digging into things best left alone," he muttered. But after a long pause, he sighed and motioned for me to follow. We walked past endless shelves of yellowed newspapers and brittle books before he stopped at a section marked Restricted Records. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound journal and handed it to me. "This is all we have left. The rest disappeared, just like the people who went looking for it." I swallowed hard, took the book, and sat at a nearby table. The cover was cracked, the pages fragile. I carefully flipped through, scanning dates and entries until I found what I was looking for. August 3rd, 1897. The handwriting was elegant but shaky, as if written in a hurry. "Something is wrong in St. Gabriel's. The new priest, Father Alistair, is not what he seems. The congregation whispers of strange sounds in the night, of shadows moving where no light should be. And last Sunday, a woman went missing during Mass. Gone, vanished, right in front of everyone." My heart pounded as I kept reading. October 12th, 1897. More disappearances. The church is emptying. Those who stay claim to hear voices coming from beneath the floorboards. One man, desperate for answers, broke open a section near the altar. and found a tunnel leading into the dark. He never came out. Father Alistair told the townsfolk to stop searching, that it was God's will. But we all know, this is not God's work. I turned the page and immediately recoiled. A sketch. A detailed drawing of the figure I had seen in the window. The long, tattered robes. The empty, glowing eyes. But beneath the sketch, one sentence had been scrawled, almost violently. He is not a man. He was never a man. I shivered and kept reading. December 25th, 1897. On the night of Christmas Eve, the church burned. No one knows how the fire started, but it spread fast, swallowing the nave, the pulpit, the confession booths. By dawn, nothing remained but the stone walls. Father Alistair was never found. Some say he perished in the flames. Others say he walked into the fire willingly, that he was never meant to leave. I stared at the final line, my breath caught in my throat. The church may be in ruins, but it is not empty. He is still there, waiting. A sudden chill ran down my spine. I slammed the book shut, my hands shaking. The librarian watched me closely, his expression unreadable. "You saw him, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I hesitated, then nodded. His lips pressed into a thin line. "Then you should know. Once you see him, he never forgets you. He follows." The words clawed into my mind like ice. I left the archive in a daze, the weight of what I had learned pressing down on my chest. Father Alistair, if that's even what he was, had never truly left the church, and now, after all these years, he had noticed me. I should have stayed away. I should have forgotten. But it was too late, because as I stepped outside, the afternoon sunlight doing little to warm me, I felt it again. That same cold, suffocating presence, watching, waiting, and in the reflection of the library's glass doors, just over my shoulder, I saw those glowing eyes staring back at me. I should have left town that night. I should have packed my bags and driven as far away as possible. But I didn't. Somewhere deep inside, I knew it wouldn't matter. Once you see him, he never forgets you. The librarian's words echoed in my mind like a prophecy, one I had already become a part of. So instead of running, I did the unthinkable. I went back. It was close to midnight when I arrived at St. Gabriel's Church. The ruins loomed before me, drenched in silver moonlight. The wind whispered through the cracks, carrying with it an unnatural stillness. Something was waiting. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, my breath coming in slow, controlled exhales. The wooden door stood slightly ajar, as if expecting me. The moment I stepped inside, the air turned thick, suffocatingly heavy. The pews remained empty, the altar bathed in shadows. But there was something new. A single candle flickering at the center of the church. The flame barely moved, as if untouched by the wind, casting a pool of light around it. Beside it, the floor was different. The old wooden boards had been disturbed. My pulse quickened. This was the spot mentioned in the journal. The place where the man had found a hidden tunnel. The place where he was never seen again. A deep sense of dread curled in my gut. But my hands moved before my mind could stop them. I knelt, fingers tracing along the weakened planks, and pulled. The wood groaned, cracked, then gave way. A gaping hole stared back at me, revealing a staircase spiraling down into the earth. The air that rushed out was thick, damp, and wrong, like the breath of something ancient waiting below. I should have turned back, but something pulled me forward. As I descended, the darkness swallowed me whole. My flashlight flickered, struggling against the void. The deeper I went, the colder it became, until my breath curled in the air like mist. Then I reached the bottom. A massive, underground chamber stretched before me, its walls lined with faded paintings of tortured faces. The ground was uneven, damp with something I didn't want to identify. And in the center of it all, a stone altar. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. The altar was covered in deep scratch marks, as if something or someone had tried to claw their way free. Chains hung from its edges, rusted but still intact. And behind it, carved into the wall, was a symbol I didn't recognize. A twisted shape, almost human. But wrong. I took a step forward, and the moment my foot hit the stone, the whisper returned. But this time, it wasn't just a voice. It was everywhere, surrounding me, crawling into my ears, into my skull. You should not have come. The candle light flickered violently, casting shifting shadows across the walls. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the stairs behind me. I turned, flashlight shaking, and saw it. Him, Father Alistair. He stood at the base of the staircase, his black robes hanging in tatters. His face, if it could even be called that, was a gaping void, a hollow mask of darkness where eyes should be. But the worst part? He was smiling. Not with lips, not with teeth, but with the very air around him. "You opened the door," he rasped. The room shuddered. The walls groaned as if alive. The paintings of tortured faces seemed to move, their mouths opening in silent screams. The air turned thick as shadows slithered from the walls, crawling toward me. Panic surged through my veins. I took a step back, but the darkness followed. "You cannot leave now," Alistair whispered. Then the altar split open. A deep, black abyss gaped beneath it, and from within something began to rise. A shape. A mass of shifting limbs, of empty eyes, of gaping mouths, all whispering in unison. I ran. I sprinted up the stairs, lungs burning, heart pounding like a war drum. The whispers chased me, clawing at my mind, trying to pull me back down. The moment I reached the church's entrance, the heavy wooden doors slammed shut. I was trapped. A laugh, low, cruel, echoed through the nave. "Did you think you could escape?" I turned, just heaving. And there he stood, Father Alistair, his form now twisting, his limbs elongating unnaturally. The shadows around him pulsed, hungry, and then the bell tower rang. A deafening chime split the air, once, twice, 12 times. And in that moment, as the final toll faded, the church began to collapse. The walls shook, the ceiling cracked, and a terrible wail filled the air. The shadows screamed, recoiling, as beams of moonlight broke through the crumbling structure. I didn't think. I just ran. I threw myself at the doors. And this time, they gave way. The night air hit me like a wave of ice. I stumbled forward, barely managing to keep my footing as the church behind me imploded. Dust and debris filled the air. The once towering ruins reduced to nothing but rubble. And then, silence. I lay there, for what felt like hours, staring at the empty space where St. Gabriel's had stood. It was over, or so I thought, because as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something in the debris. A single, untouched candle, and behind it, a pair of glowing eyes, watching, waiting. He was still there, and he would never forget me.